Our panelists are getting mic'd right now, so please bear with us for just a moment. My name is Corina DuBois, and I'm going to be your moderator today. And some of the things that we're going to talk about is the fact that there's a lot of disinformation on the internet, and it's not just your grandmother that is sending you an email without checking it first. It's actually a social and global problem. And what we would like to do today is address what those problems are and how we can challenge everybody to come up with creative solutions in a global digital world. So thank you for my panelists that are here today. I'd like to start with Dr. Bray and Ieva to help set the stage for what it is that we're actually looking at. Dr. Bray.
Well, thank you, Corina. And first and foremost, it is a pleasure to have all of you gather today, both with us in person and online. I'm a big believer that we are the cavalry. No one else is going to solve this. We all have to play a role in addressing this challenge. And what specifically is this challenge? Well, the good news is anyone can print or write whatever they want on the internet. We address the challenges of misinformation and disinformation, and at the same time remain open societies. Now, one of the things we were talking about prior to coming on stage here was it is 70 years since the UN Declaration of Human Rights. But imagine if we tried to actually ratify human rights now and reach agreement. Can you imagine what would be happening around the world? Maybe there would actually be some conspiracy theories as to why this was occurring. Maybe they've got a hidden agenda. Would politicians have been able to actually come together and put aside their own personal differences to pass the UN Declaration of Human Rights? Or to make it even more real, imagine if the Berlin Wall had not fallen in 1989, but fallen in 2009. Would have actually been a peaceful transition to what eventually became representative democracy. These are the questions we need to figure. We don't have any easy answers, but we hope to leave you with what are the unmet challenges that need to be addressed in this space.
Hello, everyone. It's really a pleasure for me to be here, and I guess I'm here from Europe, so I always say that because I feel that there is a slightly different perspective in Europe, in particular because I'm coming from a government sector, and so I have a government perspective. I also used to work for cybersecurity in my own country, being a head of cybersecurity, so I always warn that my opinion might not always very well resonate here. Yet I think I believe in it, and I think there are a lot of things one can learn from Europe, or there are things that we can pick up from Europe's experience. I'm myself from Latvia, and as my dear husband spoke before, in Estonia, I think it's a great example to show that the country can be online, the country can be online, the people can have actually digital ID, and they can be secure, and they can be the #1 in freedoms. So there must be something that works together of all those components if we adopt them, adjust, and respect. And I think in this discussion about disinformation, as we discussed before, for me, it is really a question. Would human rights universal declaration be adopted now? My country just dropped out of conversations that take place in Morocco on refugees, on UN Migration Pact. And it was very much shaped by discussion on social media. It was shaped by populists. It was shaped by those outraged opinions. It was very hard to have an educated discussion online about the real problem in the world. So I was wondering if we will not take any action, whether in the future there will be actually a government or governments with whom we will want to discuss, and it will be possible to discuss in a pragmatic way. So my #1 thought, obviously coming myself from government, is that I really encourage people to work together with governments. I think Europe is doing that better. I'm sure we will make a lot of mistakes in that cooperation, but I think none of us goes into that debate with the really bad intentions. We all are trying to learn our best from that process, and I think it's important. From my perspective, it has always been a role of government when society feels threatened, or when society feels confused, or when society does not know how to deal with certain aspects. So that's why that would be my sort of one point to encourage also people here in the US, but across the world, to try to find solutions together with government. I think government is stepping in because government also is at loss how to deal with the current challenges.
Thank you, Ieva. And David Perlman, how would you say that industry addresses this?
Well, first I'd like to say that I'm here from America, so I have a very limited perspective on all these things, which I might add is my own perspective and not my employer's. I totally agree that industry needs to work with government. That's probably the part my employer didn't want me to say. But I actually think the harder part of that equation in America, at least, is government getting used to working with industry. The people that I've talked to in the government, in particular the military, they're kind of used to, especially the military people, they're kind of used to just bossing people around. And I think that given the fact that when we talk about disinformation or information warfare, or whatever you want to call it, the battlefield itself is literally owned by these private companies, that the government kind of at some point has to swallow its pride and learn that there's going to be some kind of coming hat in hand saying, please help, as opposed to, I mean, I suppose the alternative approach would be a whole bunch of draconian regulation, but it would be unlikely to be effective without being written in a cooperative manner. So there's really no kicking the ball down the field without actual cooperation and sort of humility on both sides.
I think that's a great answer, and I think that it begs the question, where do we find that line? How do we, as people-centered, focusing on how folks are going to use this information, use this technology within our government regulations, how are we going to build that?
So, well, first of all, I'm Marc Rogers. I'm the VP of Cybersecurity at Okta. I'm also the head of security for DEF CON, the world's largest hacker convention. And many, many years ago, I was the first hacktivist. So I have a slightly different take on these things. I'm also British. Let's make this multinational. I don't believe that we should leave this entirely up to governments and industry. I believe that there's a third element to this trifecta, and that is the people. We have a fantastic resource in the hacker community that should be tapped. We have some incredible engineers coming out of universities, coming out of industry, all of whom can contribute to solving this problem. And I think the only way to solve this problem and maintain the beauty of the openness of the internet is if all three parties play a significant role in this.
And actually, if I could amplify, I think you're absolutely right. Whether you call it a fifth column or something like that. I mean, in the United States, I'll give a shout out to Guardian AI as one example, but there's several others as well, that the people who know best how this works may very well be the people that can help with different groups, both the private sector and the public sector, to draw the line in the sand and say, we will not stand for misinformation.
So how do we get there? What's the next step? Ieva.
Well, I don't know how, I mean, we obviously, in my little country, we just do get everybody around the table and we discuss, and I think partly we do experiment. I liked in the morning, I think Wendy mentioned the fact that the world is experimenting. You know, China is experimenting with one model and US is the other one, and Europe is experimenting with different regulations. And we have been in a situation where we have to cancel regulations and think about other ways how to deal with. So it's nothing new. So I would say that's coming. What I see as a sort of, in particular in disinformation, I think it comes down to social media right now. And I think it's a big topic that we all have to sit and discuss. And I think we've seen that in history in many cases. It's true that there is no one analogy that we could take and say, oh, let's do like we did in history let's do with that with internet. But I think there's a lot of good lessons. We have split up big oil companies that, you know, in Europe we have a clear rule. If you are oil owner, you can't be the one who owns also pipes, because that kind of creates antitrust and all monopolies. I mean, you have broken up here AT&T when it used to be too big and too monopoly. We have the regulations how whoever mentioned this morning that you reflect what is in food, so you know what you eat. I mean, you know in a way what you consume. So there's many different ways in our history how we realize that there is some new area that becomes too big or becomes very big, influences a lot, and we don't know what to do. I was amazed to read another week a story from Philippines where 90–70% of people are on Facebook, and everything is pretty much decided in Facebook. So it is a very big question. How do you do with something that I, as coming from government, would call even a critical infrastructure from my country, which actually even sits not in my country, but belongs somewhere else. So it raises a lot of difficult issues, but like with any critical infrastructure, it's not that government comes in and regulates, but government together with the company and, if needed, with non-governmental sector or people representing those, discuss what are those elements or benchmarks that critical infrastructure has to fit in and fulfill in order to serve societies that they are now representing. And I think that is very much needed, because we all wake up in the morning and we all have good intentions to help the world, but we always start with priorities that is immediate, that we have to deal. And I don't know how much in a business we all can afford to deal with public good unless it's something that is also strictly required. So that.
How do you eat an elephant? One small mouthful at a time. I think that applies to this problem. It's a huge problem. And I think the first place we need to start is identifying what the problem statements are and how we need to solve them, because there are multiple issues all across the board, and any one of them slipping through could just undermine everything else. You look at the deluge of fake news and fake information. Well, that has a very clear solution, which is you need to anchor it in identity and show that the real people are making these posts. But how do you do that without creating a situation where you're either balkanizing the internet or you're censoring people who have legitimate things to say? It's actually quite a challenging problem. So I think the first step is, let's document these problems, let's look at the acceptable solutions, and then let's start working towards a common goal.
And in order to eat an elephant, you might want to think about the elephant in the room. See what I did there? So regarding what you said about the fifth column, I think it's important to acknowledge the elephant in the room, that there already is a fifth column domestically in the US of these sort of dark arts PR firms that have been running extremely active and effective disinformation campaigns for private purposes that are not necessarily in the public good. This has been going on for a long time. They have it down to a fine art. They may not have it down to the same level of fine art that hostile foreign entities like Russia do, but I do think it's also clear that some of the ability of hostile adversaries to take advantage of us through misinformation and disinformation channels sort of piggybacked on existing efforts that we had already done to ourselves. And here in the US, at least, the way that the Constitution works, it's not necessarily either possible or desirable to just say that we're going to tell private companies that they can't do this. So what that sort of leaves is that unfortunately, there may need to be a sort of domestic arms race of fighting fire with fire. And I think that that would be one of the roles for this fifth column that you're talking about. Of course, there's a lot of potential for such an arms race to get out of hand when you're talking about domestic disinformation. So I think one of the things that we need to have on the near future agenda is how will we put together guidelines and frameworks for fighting back against disinformation in the fifth column, sort of the frontline, special forces of disinformation defense. They still need to have some operating guidelines to make sure that they don't get too out of hand. But I think it's pretty much inevitable that this is going to, in fact, I know from people that I've talked to that this is, in fact, definitely going to happen. So we need to be making sure that it gets done well.
So open to, on the panel, there was a time period where we didn't have rules that said you can't do slander or libel against a person. So we eventually realized that if you say something false, there should be recourse. The trouble with the internet is the more you say that's not true, people think it is true, or it just amplifies it. So maybe that's one of the challenges too, which is what's your recourse if someone does a deep fake video that makes you look like you're doing something you never did, or they now use your audio voice and claim you said something you never said. How to address that in a way that this doesn't amplify it even more?
So I think that these are all very good points, and I really love the challenge. I think that's the word of this panel, the challenge. We're not going to be able to wrap it up with a nice bow, but we are going to be able to agree.
We can't solve it in 20 minutes?
I wouldn't be on this stage if that was true. I think that we can all agree that we do have a challenge. And it sounds like from this panel, the first thing that we can do is outline what those challenges are. Marc gave us some very good ideas for what we do. And David, thank you, because there are a lot of social engineering bad actors as well as good actors, right? So we need to codify that in a very global, general sense, and then take that forward into what it is that we want to accomplish and what it is that we want to see. And I think as individuals and as organizations and as governments, we're able to come together and say that we agree to this. I don't know whether or not that's going to be another UN declaration, maybe not solved today on the stage, but I think that these are really great questions that we should take back, and I would like to leave you with the word challenge. Thank you all.
Thank you.